To get started on this exercise, we're going to be taking one of your hand composition that we created in a previous exercise and vectorizing it using Adobe Illustrator. So to get started, the first thing you need to do is to make sure you've finished up all 5 of your different hand compositions. From here, you'll simply select one that you want to vectorize and practice with. We're going to jump into Adobe Illustrator and let's set up a new document. We'll go to File, down to New. The size of the document can be exactly the same size as your original artboard, so 10 inches wide by 15 inches tall. Also, make sure you're working in RGB color mode. From here, we'll say Create. This will give us our new document. Then we'll go up to File and down to Place, and let's place in our hand composition that we created. Not that one. There we go. Now when I place it, I'm simply going to place it right on top of my artboard. And let's open up our Layers panel, and I'm going to let this be my tracing layer, which I'll lock down, and I'm going to create a new layer that I'll do all of my tracing on top of. So this layer will stay the same, and everything else will be done in layer 2. Next, let's create a set of swatches that's based on the color scheme that we've got already in our photograph. In order to create these swatches, I want to pick up colors that give me at least 3 or 4 different shadow values and 3 or 4 different highlight and midtone values. So to do this and to create our own swatches, I'm going to go and select my rectangle tool. I'm going to set my fill color to white with no stroke around it. And let's give ourselves a variety of different squares up here at the top. For now, I'll make a copy of these. And let's do, say, 10 different squares. This will be more than enough, but this will give us a good set of darker values, midtones, and even highlight values. From here, I can use my Eyedropper tool. And with the Eyedropper tool, make sure you've got your foreground color or your fill color in front. And when you click anywhere inside of here, you can see it'll pick up that color. If you hold down the Option key, you can see that your Eyedropper tool will change its icon, and that will allow you to apply it to that swatch. So I'm going to go through and pick up as many dark tones as I can. In this case, I've got a lighter purple that's also on here. That looks good. Hold down Option and click there. As long as there's a good difference between the two, that's what we're looking for. If I move into my greens, I can see I've got a darker version of a green, which I can hold down Option and apply. And I've got a lighter version of a green, which I can hunt, hold down Option and apply there too. And as far as my highlights go, we've got this kind of flesh tone. And let's pick up a lighter highlight from here too. It's almost white. That looks good. Hold down Option and apply it there. You may find a need for more or even less values that are already in your design, but in this case it looks like I can pull out the entire design using just these 6 different options. From here, let's back out. I can get rid of any unnecessary squares up at the top, and to save these as swatches within my Swatches panel, let's open up our swatches, and I'll drag it over here so we can see it. You can highlight all of the swatches that you just created, go up to the options at the top of your Swatches panel, and choose Add Selected Colors. This will automatically add them to the bottom of your panel, and we'll take it a step farther. Whoops, didn't mean to select those. Let's click on all the new swatches and hold down Shift to select them and put them inside of their own group. You can give it a name if you want. And those will be the color palettes that we use once we start to vectorize out our design. I can now delete away all my swatches. Let's pull this back over here to be ready to use. Now comes the fun part of actually vectorizing our entire composition. I'm going to go back to my Layers panel and ensure that I'm working on layer 2. And we're going to take this one shape and color at a time. And we're going to work from our largest shapes down to our smaller details and eventually add in little brush strokes underneath it as well. Now, it depends on your composition and how you want to start this off, but I like to make one large shape out of the entire area that I'm drawing. And in this case, if I look at it, it looks like my overall hands kind of have a green texture to it, or at least green is the most dominant color. All of the smaller shapes, the highlights and the shadows, are little details that we can go back in and add on later. So I'm going to start off by making a green outline shape for this entire hand structure. In order to do this, you can use whatever drawing tool you're most comfortable with. But if you're using your pencil tablet or your digital tablet, you may want to use the pencil tool. It's hiding underneath the shaper tool if you don't see it. Now with this pencil tool, if you double click on it, be aware of some of the pencil tool options. If you're trying to get small details in your entire drawing, you may want to set your fidelity closer to accurate. But if you're trying to smooth out areas, you may want to keep it more smooth. And in my case, maybe I'll keep it closer to accurate. Also, when we're finished, we want to be able to fill in our pencil strokes, but I don't want to do that just quite yet. In my case, I want to see what I'm outlining as I draw, so I'm going to uncheck Fill Pencil Strokes for now. I do want to keep it selected, and I want to be able to close my paths and edit my paths when I get close to them. So we'll say OK to this. I've got my Swatches panel open, and I'm going to simply start off with my mid-tone of green. Later on, I can go back in and add the darker values on top of it. If you need to, you can zoom in, and you can start off with any point. I'm going to set my stroke color by swapping these out. Let's go down to here. And my fill color to be none. This way when I draw, it's going to simply draw a single line. Remember, when you draw with your pencil, if you stop, you can always start off next to it and then redraw again, and it will connect in with it as well. When drawing, take your time and carefully go along the edge. If you make a mistake, you can always stop and do Command Z and undo what you've done, or you can use your eraser tool and erase away the line that you've already drawn. If you reach an edge like this, holding down the space bar will give you your hand and let you move around. When you let go of your space bar, it'll return you back to your pencil to draw. With this done, I can go back around and check my outline, and if I see some areas that need correcting or fixing, there's a couple of things I can do. First off, underneath your pencil tool, you have a smooth tool that allows you to smooth out any edges that are a little bit rough. So for instance, right here, I think I've got a little bit off a bit. With the smooth tool, it's a simple matter of being able to drag along the line. You can see how it gets rid of a lot of your unnecessary pixels or points, and it will smooth out an otherwise rough edge. I can do it along the thumb here, and I can, in general, be able to redraw or replace it around. If it's still off by just a little bit, you can either use your white arrow selection tool and carefully click on the anchor point and move it over until it fixes it, or there is another tool hiding underneath your width tool called your warp tool. With the warp, it looks like a large brush, and you can change the size of it by double-clicking on it and fixing the height and the width. We'll set it all to be about 50 pixels and 50 pixels. There we go. But with the warp tool, it allows you nudge gently a line over until it fixes where it's at. So if I wanted to move the thumb, you can see how I can easily push it until it places there as well. Now there are some disadvantages to using this. Sometimes it will erase away some necessary lines or some details that you have, so use it sparingly. But I like to use the warp tool instead of the selection tool simply because it'll go a little bit faster and in general give me the results that I'm looking for. So again, we're pushing it and fixing it all the way till it gets along the edge. That all looks good from there. We'll back out now. Finally, we can reverse the stroke and fill by clicking on the arrow, and this will swap up and give us our base color that we're going to work with. All of the other little details are going to happen inside of my hand line. So I'm going to go over to my layers panel and lock this down. I'm going to call this my base color. Next, let's go in and start adding some details. I'll create a new color, and for now I'm going to turn off visibility for my base so I can see my photograph again. I'm going to start off with my highlights first. I'm going to zoom in. Let's take it one part at a time. For my highlights, remember this is broken up into two different colors. I've got kind of a darker and a lighter version of a highlight, so that kind of flesh tone and then a white highlight tone. Since the flesh tone, this little tan color, is the most common, I'm going to draw that off first, and all of the other highlights I'll go back later and add those as a secondary detail. I'm going to set my fill color to be my darker tone. I've got my pencil chosen, and I'm going to double click on it, and let's change up the setting one more time. In this case, I definitely want it to be much more accurate, and I want to fill in whatever pencil strokes that I have with whatever fill color that I've got. In this case, this will allow me to draw off shapes and automatically fill them in without actually drawing it off as a line. The other thing is I like to squint my eye and look for these amorphic shapes, and it's really up to your artistic interpretation. So something like that would look like that kind of shape. You can add more or less detail if you want. Don't think that you have to get every single pixel. This is what makes the style really show up in your design. But definitely zoom in and take your time about drawing off everything that you see and try to get it as accurate as possible. From here, you can simply draw it off and then place those in there. So let's take some time and go through and highlight all of my little highlight details and treat everything as one large shape that you can lump together. Now, I will admit there were some parts of this that were tricky and a bit ambiguous, and so it's left up to my interpretation of how I would treat them. For instance, this part of his thumb. It is lighter, but there's a good bit of green to it. Should I have colored that in? Well, it could go either way. In a later process, we're going to go in and add on these smaller details by hatching them in. So if you've got small details that are simply being covered up or too difficult to outline or to figure out, it's okay to skip over those. What we're looking for now is just your overall shapes. With this done, you can have a look and see what this looks like by turning back on visibility of your base and seeing what it looks like with that base color. So far, so good. As we've done with the others, I'm going to lock down this one. I'm going to turn off visibility of my base, and I'm also going to turn off visibility of my layer 3, and let's add another layer. Inside of this layer is where I'm going to choose my brightest highlights, and I'm going to go through now and look for those even higher tones. If you don't have this, you can certainly skip over this part, but the gist is still the same. I'm simply going to go through, and anywhere that I see that it has that particular color, I'm going to go and add on that as a shape. Let's check out how this looks. Returning to my layers and turning on visibility, you can see how it's starting to really pop out. Also from here, if you need to, you can go and clean up any areas that are maybe slightly more ambiguous. So for instance, I can see here on the thumb where my highlights aren't necessarily matching up with the shape of my thumb. So I'll turn off and lock down certain layers that I need. So I'll unlock my undercoat, grab my warp tool, make sure I got the correct layer selected, and I'll push that over till it lines up nicely and fills out the rest of my thumb. That looks good for there. So take some time, go through and fix anything that doesn't look 100% accurate. Once you're finished, we can lock this down, and as before, we can turn off our base and all of your other layers. Now let's start looking at our midtones and our shadows. As we've done with the others, I'm going to start off with my midtone, in this case my midtone or my darker version of my green, and I'll draw off all of those shadow shapes next. Go over to my layers, create a new layer on top of this, get my pencil tool, zoom in, and simply start looking for those darker green shapes to draw off within my design. All right, with this part done, we can return to our layers and turn on all of them just to see what it looks like in context. And so far, it's looking pretty good. Again, at this time, you can go through and tweak and clean up any parts that are necessary. But remember, if you have any ambiguous areas that just seem like it could blend one way or the other, don't sweat those too much. Later on, we're going to go through and do blending and hatching with all of those. As with the others, let's go back, lock it down, add a new layer, and now I'm going to start working on my darker shadows. With these, I'll start off with my lighter shadow colors. Turn off visibility for all my layers, zoom in. Now let's look for some lighter shadows. With these shadows done, let's turn on all our layers and see what it looks like. So far, so good. And then finally, let's go back in and add in our darkest shadows. As with all the others, we'll make one more layer on the very top, lock down all of our other layers, and I'm going to turn off their visibility. And let's zoom in, and I'm going to choose my darkest value now as my fill color, and then add in those dark fill color values. With that done, let's turn on all of the layers visibility and see what we've got. You can even turn off our photograph in the very background. Looks perfect. The last thing that I would do is to go to the very bottom and add one more layer just above your tracing layer, and let's add just a simple rectangle behind everything. So I'll zoom out. I'll choose that darkest color or the color that matches my background and click and drag and add my rectangle to it. And it can be the same size as your normal background. Now when you turn off the photograph, this is all that's left for it. If you haven't done so already, now's a good time to save it. So let's go up to File and Save. And I'm simply going to call this my hand vector design. We'll keep everything the same as far as the options for Illustrator. Also at this time, this is where you can go back and clean up any edges that you think may go astray. For instance, if I look on the side here, I think this green is poking out a little bit too far on some of these edges. This is where I would simply select the appropriate layer and unlock it, and then either use my wide arrow selection tool or my warp tool to push it until it gets the exact shape that you want and need for your overall design. So take some time now and clean up your design. In the next section, or the next part of this exercise, we're going to discuss different ways of hatching and blending together these overall basic shapes.